The Second World War was over. Millions were dead, cities were in ruins. But instead of peace, a new struggle began. This was the Cold War. It lasted for almost 50 years. The Cold War was a time of tension and suspicion. It shaped the world we live in today. The Cold War was different from other wars. There were no massive battles, but it was a scary time. Both sides had nuclear weapons. These weapons could destroy the world many times over. The threat of nuclear war hung over everything. The Cold War was mainly between two superpowers. These were the United States and the Soviet Union. They had been allies in World War II, but they had very different ideas about how the world should be run. The United States believed in capitalism. This meant free markets and individual freedom. The Soviet Union believed in communism. This meant a society controlled by the government. In communism, everyone was supposed to be equal. After World War II, mistrust grew between the US and the Soviet Union. They couldn't agree on how to rebuild Europe. The Soviets took control of Eastern European countries. They imposed communist governments there. Winston Churchill, the British leader, described this division as an iron curtain. It separated East and West Europe. The US and its allies formed NATO, a military alliance. The Soviets responded with the Warsaw Pact, their own alliance. The world was now divided into two armed camps. The Cold War had many dangerous moments. One of the first was the Berlin Blockade in 1948. Berlin, though located deep inside the Soviet zone, was divided between the Allies. The Soviets blocked all road and rail access to West Berlin. They hoped to force the Western powers out. The US and its allies responded with the Berlin airlift. For over a year, they flew supplies into West Berlin. This showed the West's resolve. The Soviets eventually lifted the blockade, but the Berlin blockade showed how dangerous the Cold War could be. The most dangerous moment of the Cold War was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. Cuba is just 90 miles from the United States. The US saw this as a direct threat. For 13 days, the world held its breath. The US and the Soviet Union came close to nuclear war. Finally, the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles. In return, the US secretly agreed to remove its own missiles from Turkey. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed just how close the world had come to nuclear annihilation. The Cold War wasn't just about weapons, it was also a competition for hearts and minds. Both sides wanted to prove their system was better. This led to the arms race, the space race, and intense espionage. The arms race saw both sides build more and more nuclear weapons. The space race was a competition to see who could get to space first. Espionage, or spying, was rampant. Each side tried to steal secrets from the other. The US and the Soviet Union never directly fought each other, but they did fight indirectly in proxy wars. These were wars in other countries, where each side supported a different side. The Korean War, from 1950 to 1953, and the Vietnam War, from 1955 to 1975, were two major proxy wars. The US supported South Korea and South Vietnam. The Soviet Union supported North Korea and North Vietnam. Millions died in these wars. They showed how the Cold War could have devastating consequences around the world. In the 1970s, things seemed to be improving. The US and the Soviet Union entered a period of détente. This meant a relaxation of tensions. They signed treaties to limit nuclear weapons. They increased trade and communication. But in the 1980s, tensions rose again. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The US boycotted the 1980 Olympics in Moscow. President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. In the mid-1980s, Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union. He introduced reforms called perestroika, or restructuring, and glasnost, or openness. Gorbachev wanted to improve the Soviet economy and give people more freedom. These reforms had unintended consequences. People in Eastern Europe, inspired by Gorbachev's reforms, began to demand change. Revolutions swept across Eastern Europe in 1989. The Berlin Wall, a symbol of division for almost 30 years, came down. In 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. The Cold War was over.